We need to talk about the state of the game, because whether you frequent community forums like Discord or Reddit, or whether you've left your own thoughts here on the channel in recent weeks, it's hard to miss the fact that a lot of players right now have a lot of criticism and feedback to give about various different topics and areas of the game. Now, after giving it all quite some thought over this past weekend, I think there's at least one underlying root cause connected to many of these, and I fear that if some kind of course correction is not made, we might see things continue to snowball and more people become disgruntled, which I don't think any of us want. So just so that we are on the same page, let me run down the list of some of the major topics that people are debating right now. I don't doubt that this won't cover each and every single gripe that people have with the current state of the game, but at least these are the major ones that I've had you all reach out to me about, or that I've continued to see repeated across social media. Feel free to add to the list down in the comments if I miss any important ones. Escalation and prototype gear are of course two of the biggest topics. Now this is somewhat of an umbrella category, there are several subtopics within, but on the escalation side, in a recent video last week we covered how the token system is getting on quite the number of nerves at the moment, largely due to the problems with how group leaders take on all the risk, yet earn less at the end of a successful escalation run compared to party members, and how that disparity has been accentuated by the introduction of the prototype vendor. There's then prototype gear itself, which has obviously been divisive ever since it was first announced. Now that we're a month and a half out from its release, I think we have enough distance to look back and say, has this succeeded in its stated objective, which was giving veterans and the hardcore audience something to chase again? Well, I can't answer for anybody other than myself. I've logged more time into this season than any other in recent memory. Usually my playtime is very skewed toward a season's beginning and then ending phase. Across the board, it seems like people have found a purpose again in the endgame and long-term goals to strive for, whereas before there just wasn't much of that. But to say that there are no issues with the current system or further room for improvement would of course be incorrect. Some of the more recent discussions I've seen people asking is actually kind of the inverse of where we were several weeks ago, where many thought that proto gear was too hard to get. Now people are saying, is it too easy? Can new players access it too easily? Does that in turn bypass other intended progression steps for a newer endgame player? I think all of that is kind of ironic after how many asked for the drop rates to be buffed in escalation, but it is still an important conversation to have nonetheless, and I anticipate that we will only see discussions around that grow as more features like the prototype vendor get added. Exotic components is another big one you may have heard about or experienced yourself. The latest patch removed the ability to spam new characters and then deconstruct the free Lullaby and Ruthless that you get from the deluxe edition in order to get easy components. Now, speaking completely personally, I think methods like that are cheesy. I'm not really shedding any tears seeing it removed. I felt the same way about the Watch Mule alts, where I question why things like that are allowed to be in the game for as long as they are. It's only going to sting more for players using those methods once they are eventually removed. However, although I don't think that removing farms that don't actually involve engaging with the endgame content isn't a terrible thing, the requests and backlash that have arisen with that removal I think are completely valid, and that's people asking, okay, well nothing in the endgame itself can actually match the consistency for exotic component farming that method did, and so with their raised significance with expertise levels being needed for prototype upgrades, can we get some kind of endgame resource reward refresh? Then, even though it's not in the game any longer, topics like the Cherry Blossom Key debacle are still very much relevant, and I would say have contributed to this compounding community sentiment. We spent 3 weeks with multiple drop rate changes, the Ronin exploit was patched out, and then the event was gone. But is a more in-depth discussion still needed so that we can pinpoint what sort of reward cadence we want to see from future events? Cheating is of course an ever-present topic, and something you've seen more recently is that due to increased emphasis on farming the higher tiers of escalation for some of the game's best loot, cheating within PvE content has become more prevalent. I haven't run into anything myself on console, fortunately, but I've heard from plenty on PC who apparently pretty regularly now encounter people skating through missions and one-shotting enemies when matchmaking for tier 10. Then of course there's the PvP side of cheating, which I swear somehow they always find a way to one-up themselves. The latest clip to spread across the community last week was this one, where somebody figured out how to kill people at the base of operations. I've literally never seen anything like this before, and so while we've heard the devs continue to promise that improvements to anti-cheat are on the way, we've really yet to see the fruits of that in-game, and things only seem to be worsening. I also have a sinking feeling that monetization is soon going to become a hot topic again. You may recall that last summer this really exploded after the first event pass was released in collaboration with the Payday franchise. I did a video myself discussing it, as the initial implementation of that was just not it, with some very unfair and anti-gameplay monetization structures put in place. Fortunately, after hearing all of that community feedback, the team did retool things pretty significantly for the next round of that, and since then I feel like things have been mostly okay. But since this season began, I know I've heard from more than a few people giving their thoughts on classified assignments returning as paid content, and that sentiment has only gotten worse since Year 8 Season 1.2 launched last week, where thanks to the new Assignments map tab, we can now see the full rewards slated for the 8 planned classified assignments for this year, including what looks to be an exclusive exotic called the Eye of Providence that's going to be given out, assumedly once you complete all 8 assignments. Now, it's certainly possible that this won't remain exclusive to these forever, at least with the named items that each mission gives. The team did say that these are timed exclusives and eventually will get added to other sources in-game, but a named item versus an exotic holds somewhat different weights, I feel, and it really just continues to drive a wedge between what was claimed that these are purely optional pieces of side content, when in reality the rewards for them just continue to stack up. And where I think a lot of people take issue is with the actual pay structure for these missions. You can either buy them individually, or you have to get the $30 season pass bundle to have the 2 of them included for that season, right? There's no like separate Year 8 assignments bundle, if you will, to get them all in one go. So yeah, I think that's going to become more and more of a discussion. Alright, well, how many minutes now are we into the video? Again, I just wanted to list off what I've seen as some of the most major points of critique and feedback right now. I know many of you reach out to me asking what my thoughts are on these individual topics. Here's the thing that I wanted to get at by listing all of those off. On their own, I don't believe that any one of these issues or topics that we just covered are unsolvable problems, right? We've seen the team navigate monetary rebalancing, like mentioned with last year and the event pass. We've seen them tackle resource rebalances, like when we got the projects revamp and exotic components got a buff to their available sources. And we've seen them do major tweaks and changes to new modes releasing, like people want right now with escalation. None of this is uncharted territory nor unfixable problems. However, as I mentioned at the beginning, I do think there is one underlying factor connecting many, if not all of these topics, and that is bandwidth. Let's take a step back. If you were around during this time, what would you say the Division 2's biggest problem was for the first couple of years after its return to content with Season 9, which delivered Countdown? I'm sure there will be a few different answers given, but I would bet that one of the most common answers would be content. The rebuilt dev team just was not big enough, nor did they have the same experience with the game and engine to deliver content at a pace that we ultimately wanted as a community, at least when compared back to the Warlords of New York days or before. We got Countdown, but then I think it was, like 13 months until Descent dropped after that. Then the big gap that occurred was between the Paradise Lost incursion and when we finally got Brooklyn, which I think was, like 19 months? And in that time, the seasons that we were getting also were not as quick as they are today. It was pretty common to see like 4.5 month seasons. And if we did happen to get a special event in that time, it was just like a project chain, nothing to the scale that we see today. Now, all of that finally changed with the release of Brooklyn last year. As we've talked about here on the channel, that seems to be the turning point where, thanks to the attention that the game got and thanks to the surge of players that it saw, that finally convinced corporate that this was a project worth investing into and funding beyond just the point of keeping it alive as we'd seen before. And thanks to that increased funding, the team size grew. They've now added additional support teams, and that is what has made the Year 8 roadmap possible, where in just Season 1 already, we've seen delivered a new mode, a new type of gear, big retaliation improvements, 2 new classified assignments, and throughout the remainder of the year, we're set to get, 6 more classified assignments, a new incursion, another new DLC, crossplay. So from a balance sheet standpoint, the game has been doing better than it has in years, and we've mentioned here on the channel how I believe that is going to be reflected in Ubisoft's year-end earnings call this Wednesday. But there are 2 main keys to running a successful live service game, and in my view, that is content as well as community support. Now, for the past many years, like we just covered, Division 2's biggest problem was on the content side. They just couldn't get enough of it out the door, and that led to the player base remaining relatively small, but that has now been solved. The miraculous happened where a 7-year-old game clawed its way out of that limbo, and we're now seeing content production on a way larger and way quicker scale. But in doing so, I fear that this has stretched them so thin, and they're on such a tighter timeline now to get these seasons cranked out and get this content produced, that it just hasn't left much room for agility when it comes to responding to player feedback. You see, back when we were waiting months and months for something new to come around, that in turn meant that there was sufficient space given for a healthy back and forth to occur. If a patch had a pressing bug that really annoyed people, if that most recent content was lacking in one area and needed some changes, the slower development pace, I think, left enough room for the team to hear our feedback, thoroughly ponder over it, and then prioritize the fixes and changes that were needed. Whereas now, again, ordeals like the Cherry Blossom event just happened, but we're already on our way to another new event with the Brooklyn celebration this week. The season finale is next week. Sometime in there, I'm sure we're going to start hearing about the Year 8 Season 2 PTS, given that the next season is set to launch in just 4 to 5 weeks. And all of this is amid the ongoing discussions we just mentioned with escalation, prototype, exotic components, cheating, monetization. Are every single one of those things going to be sufficiently addressed with either Year 8 Season 1.3 or Year 8 Season 2? It would be great, but I doubt it. And at that point, what does Season 2 introduce that garners its own feedback? It's all but inevitable that some aspect of the update will get people talking and drum up ideas for improvement. That is the cycle that any live game goes through. So at that point, what room does that leave for the carryover topics from this season to be addressed? How long does that list keep growing? Now, I want to take a moment to say, I know what I'm saying right now may be flirting very closely to the "oh, my steak is too juicy, my lobster is too buttery" meme. I hope some of you know what I'm talking about. I'm not on here trying to complain about how much content we are now seeing for the game and how much quicker it's been releasing. Just as a fan, it has been incredible these past few months to know that the next thing is always right around the corner, that I don't have to wait weeks, months, over a year for that next big thing. But in the same way that it takes a lot of work to scale up and produce content on the level that the game is doing right now, it takes an equal amount of strategizing and experience to manage that production in such a way that it does not leave you immobile and unable to pivot where needed. Now, to be clear, I have zero clue what it takes to develop games or make content for them, nor do I know anything about managing a game development team, and I'm not trying to claim to. But I don't think it takes an expert to guess that probably a vast majority of the game's team right now is working hard on the Central Park DLC that we've heard so far next to nothing about. That is set to drop before the end of this calendar year, so at most that's 18 months after Brooklyn's release. That is a pretty tight schedule for a team that used to work at a much slower pace, and I'm sure that that whiplash is probably being felt internally as well. They're trying to grapple with this accelerated pipeline and figure out how to best manage the live game under these new circumstances. So, where does that leave us? It might sound like the solution I'm heading towards is delay everything, which, if the technical quality of something is not ready, if there's too many bugs and not enough time to squash them, then yes, I will always advocate for delays. However, I don't think that is necessarily the only path. And I don't think that we have to sacrifice this current content pace that we are seeing, that we hoped for so long that we could achieve, just to get a handle on the game's current problems. Instead, there are two areas in which I want to highlight that could have the potential to allow the player base to better communicate with the team and let them know what we want to see prioritized most in terms of game improvements, as well as potentially improving the rollout of said improvements. So, the first one of those has to do with the bug reporter. If you have not used it or even visited this online tool yet, I believe that this is one of the best new community initiatives that we've seen in recent times. Unlike the old Trello board, which was read-only, the bug reporter actually allows players to submit their own reports, including evidence, and contribute to other people's reports to substantiate them. But perhaps one of its best features, I think, is the ability to upvote issues that you either have experienced yourself or that you wish to communicate should receive the highest priority to be fixed. And that was the team's statement when it released. They said that they would prioritize fixing whichever things the community bumped to the highest on the list. And we now have evidence that that model can work. You may be familiar with the fragile armor bug. It was an issue that caused the fragile armor directive to regularly bug out and hinder its usage. That was around in-game for like 5 years. But then, as soon as the bug reporter launched, players submitted it, it quickly rose to the highest voted bug on the board, and in last week's Year 8 Season 1.2 patch, it finally got fixed. So, my proposal, why not use the framework that this board has created and extend the functionality to game design feedback? Of course, we do already have outlets like Discord and Reddit where the teams say that they scour regularly for feedback, but Fragile Armor was reported in those places many a time, and I just think that having one official consolidated feedback thread is beneficial for visibility. You've even already seen this happening on the bug reporter itself. People have submitted tickets that are feedback based and that don't really fit into the format that's laid out because they want to share their opinions and have them actually be heard. So, and I'm sure this could not be done at just the snap of your fingers, but what if visiting the bug reporter site offered essentially two parallel pages, one for bugs and one for feedback? And on the feedback side, similar setup. People can submit their proposals, then other community members can read those, comment, and contribute their thoughts or endorsements, and then upvote the ones that they want to see addressed most. Now, I'm sure this might not be a perfect system, as undoubtedly some requests and feedback points would call for more resources to address than others, but at the very least, I think it could start cutting through the noise and allowing the team to see plainly what issues are hurting the community most right now and how can we best utilize our available resources to tackle these problems. So that's one idea. The other then that I wanted to discuss is with the rollout of changes once the team is finally able to address them. Another big pain point for players in recent weeks that I've yet to bring up in this video is how sometimes the team does seem to be able to quickly respond to things, but more often than not, those issues seem to be things that benefit the player. The most recent examples being the Ronin exploit during the Cherry Blossom event, as well as patching out prototype drops within escalation loot crates. Now, on the one hand, I'm not going to say that I don't think they should address unintended things in the game, whether they are good or bad for the player, just based on whether or not you can simultaneously address other pressing topics. If something is bugged in the game and you have the ability to solve it in that moment, then it should be fixed. However, unquestionably, it is frustrating to see this stuff get addressed so quickly, but then we're left waiting weeks on end to see movement in other areas or progress made to address other topics. Now, part of this I believe to be due to the differences between server and client side changes, which I'll admit right up front that I know very little about, but in essence, there are some aspects of the game that the team is able to change on their end, right? They can just take the servers down for maintenance, change something, and when they come back online, it's been altered for everybody. And the benefit to those kinds of changes is that they can be done very quickly, right? All that is required is a maintenance. On the other hand, you then have client side changes, and these are the ones that we have to actually download on our end. Think Year 8 Season 1.1, 0.2, or any of the point whatever patches that we always get mid-season. Those are things that they have to alter on our downloaded end of the game, and therefore require a more substantial rollout. The downside to client-side changes is that any downloadable patch requires certification from Microsoft and Sony before you're allowed to release it for players to download, meaning the process can get bottlenecked and the release of pressing issues can become much slower when you're waiting days, potentially even a week, for these console distributors to verify the patches. Now, again, I know relatively little about this all. I don't know what constitutes a change that can be done server side versus what needs a client patch, and I think that obscurity has led to repeated frustrations from the player base. You see the Ronin exploit and escalation crates get taken out from a quick maintenance, whereas we're then waiting weeks for Fragile Armor, for example, to get addressed once it has been raised on the bug reporter. It seems like unfair prioritization, when in reality, sometimes I think it just comes down to how the game is built and what can be done through which methods. Now, is this a discrepancy that can be solved outright? I doubt it, and I say once again that I don't know what goes into determining what can be addressed through which avenue. However, one area that I do think could potentially be looked at for improvement when it comes to the development pipeline is the chosen cadence for patch rollout. By that I mean, we've had this 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 system in place for a good few years now, where every 2, 3, sometimes 4 weeks a new patch drops, and in those they bundle in as many changes that are ready to go as possible. But sometimes, as we've seen throughout the division's history, saving a pressing change for the next most convenient patch cycle can lead to frustration. I think all the way back to update 1.5, I think it was, in Division 1, the Airburst Seeker Mine at the time was so broken in PvP, and everybody who played the DZ was begging for some balance changes, and while the team I think even acknowledged that it was needed, we had to wait all the way until update 1.6 a few months later to finally see them addressed. And it's in moments like those where you think, why couldn't you have just done a one-off patch to get this fixed sooner? Ultimately, that is the point I raise here. Even if it seems trivial to send off more frequent yet smaller client-side patches, and even if in turn that may lead to frustration from some in the community who potentially have slower internet or longer download times, could it be worthwhile when the severity of an issue calls for it to do an emergency patch, if you will, much the same as how we will see emergency maintenances done? And obviously you still would not be able to bypass certification with this, and there would still be some amount of holdup there, but if it meant that these changes get in game just a bit sooner, that could go a long way towards proving towards players that you do care about the other side, and it's not just player benefiting issues that get addressed first. Once again, though, I know nothing about the complexities of updating a video game. Maybe it would be way harder to change the structure than I'm making it sound like it would be, but all I know is that the 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 cadence that we've come to know has been here for quite some time, and I wonder if it could be worth investigating changing it up to adapt to the much faster moving game that we have today versus years ago. Okay, everybody, well I think that just about covers all the topics that I wanted to go over for today. Just wanted to try and offer my perspective on the state of the game, amplify some of the biggest complaints that I've seen from the community, and offer what ideas that I can think of to try and improve the situation. As per usual, I am just one voice and one mind thinking about these things, so if you have different perspectives, other ideas for improvement, maybe you have an entirely different line of thinking as for why we are seeing all of this turbulence right now, let me know, and I do hope that we genuinely see some improvement soon. It's always more fun when people are actually enjoying the game over wishing it was in a better state, so fingers crossed for the weeks ahead. That's about all from me, though. Thank you all very much for your time if you made it all the way through this, and yeah, until I see you next, RogueGold. Ow. Oh! We just got a Ravenous! Haha! I might not be friendly. Let's go.
Coming to the Division 2.
Let's go!
And